Hello, distinguished viewers. I am your host, Samuel David. Welcome back to the BiblioSophia channel, brought to you by Anathema Publishing. Today's guest is Matt Auryn. Matt is a prominent figure in the occult and witchcraft communities. He is the author of a number of books, including Psychic Witch, A Metaphysical Guide to Meditation, Magic, and Manifestation, Mastering Magic, a course in spellcasting for the Psychic Witch. He is also the co-author for Pisces Witch, Swimming the Starry Seas with Ivo Dominguez Jr., and his most recent work, The Psychic Art of Tarot, Opening Your Inner Eye for more insightful readings, with a special introduction by actress Rachel True. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Samuel. It's an honor. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, likewise. So, for our listeners and our viewers out there, I was wondering if perhaps you could give us the Cliff Notes version of your origin story.
Tracing it is always kind of hard because I think, like a lot of people, our spiritual and magical path is kind of a lifelong process where little pieces start coming together. But the point that I mark in my head is the story that I start mastering magic with to show how like magic changed my life and how I was like I'm full in. So I was a foster care child and I bounced around a lot of places. And then by the time I was like six-ish, I was living with my grandfather and his new wife because my grandma had been deceased. And that was great because I got a lot of stability in my life that I normally didn't, but he was very emotionally and physically abusive.
Oh,
And I had essentially my idea of like my point that I recognize as my awakening was and this is the story I share in the book, is my teacher called him one day when I was like seven or eight, and told him that I was talking during the class. And so it was a Friday. So he essentially put me on restriction, extreme restriction, which his version of that was I had to be in my bedroom with the electricity turned off in my bed at all times, and I could not get up to eat or use the restroom without his permission. Which, there were a couple days. And then after that weekend, he called me out a couple days from school to make sure that I was still like, getting the message. And so, being a child, you're, especially at that age, you're very energetic. You have a lot of energy. So, I was going a little bit stir crazy, like just in my bed, and I had nothing to really think about or work with other than my mind. And I started to notice certain things, like I could rub my hands together and I could create like this energy ball between my hands. And I started having questions like, because sleep was my escape at that time. So I started having questions like, what's it like to go from this waking consciousness to like sleep consciousness? Like, what's that transition? Which is like not the normal, like, kind of questions children have at that age, but like I had nothing else to do. So I started paying attention to sort of things like how my mind works, how my consciousness sort of goes in and out of these states, even though that's not how I verbalized what was going on. I started recognizing spirits coming in and out of my room. Sometimes they'd talk to me, sometimes they wouldn't. They would just kind of pass by. But essentially, it woke something in me. And I liken it as sort of a light version of what a lot of cultures or anthropologists will talk about when they talk about like that shamanic death, or like in Jungian terms, an ego death, or in Thelema, the Night of Pan, where essentially something in me was like cracked open. And I recognized that like there's something more than what I had been raised with in terms of the church. And because like they were hardcore evangelical Pentecostal Christians. So I started questioning
I can
things.
relate to that.
And then I saw the movie The Craft, and it sounds so silly, because we had the whole wave of witches where it was like, oh, you saw The Craft and you think you're a witch now? And I totally did. So like I saw that and I was like, oh my God, I want to be empowered like these women, because I'd never seen magic, even in fiction, portrayed in a semi-realistic way. So that got me on a quest. I um I kind of started my own little cults in elementary school. So I would form my little covens of like kids that were like, yeah, I want to be a witch, you know? And there was a point where the school library took out every book on the topic of witchcraft because me and my friends were checking them all out. And you don't get much with that. Like you get like Roald Dahl and like, fiction with witches, but they definitely saw a trend that like kind of for a heavily evangelical town, because we have one of the biggest mega churches in that city, they started pulling all of it. But I found one of those like Time Life books, and the topic was on witchcraft. So a lot of it went over like historical and fiction witches, but then they had a small section that was on witches today or
Was it
witchcraft.
the Time Life Mysteries with the black cover?
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It wasn't the Enchanted Kingdom or
Right.
whatever those ones. It was I remember it had a black cover. But it had the things that you would expect to see in it. Like it had Anton LaVey and it had Aleister Crowley. But then it had a picture of Maxine Sanders, like on a hill, surrounded by her covenanters in white, and it had the word Wicca. So I was armed with a word, like, oh, this is like, something to look into. That's not the Church of Satan. Because remember, I'm like an 8-year-old.
And this, of
Coming
course, is during the Satanic Panic, which we were all living through in the 90s and in the early 80s. So yeah.
Right, right. And you got to remember, I still came out of evangelical. So there's still that kind of like, oh no, I don't want anything dealing with the devil or Satan or anything like that. So I was armed with this word, and it was right about then that they started integrating computers into our schools because I'm a millennial. So we were kind of the first wave of like getting a computer lab sort of thing. And so at lunch, I would go on to those like Angel Fire websites and like get those like the witchcraft, and they would have all these like plagiarized spells and like bad MIDI music and animated pentacles. um and so I discovered certain words to look for, which was like Wicca is what led me into like finding that on the internet. So I went to my local bookstore in the mall, which I don't think exists anymore. And I remember I kept trying to buy Scott Cunningham and Silver Raven Wolf books, and they would not let me. And it took several times for them to finally allow me to have one, like to pay for one, like without an adult, because they were treating it like it was like pornography or something, which is hilarious when you think it's like Scott Cunningham and Silver Raven Wolf books, right? So, eventually I got like the Teen Witch book and the Teen Witch kit. And one day my grandfather was being particularly physically abusive. And I went and I did this silly little spell in the Teen Witch book, Teen Witch kit book, which is called the Bullfrog Bully spell. And I cast it on my grandfather. And then within days, everything sort of lined up to where I could leave his custody and go live with my uncle in Southern California. And then that led me to like eventually like my dad getting custody of me and stuff like that. But like that very simple-ish childish spell, like it worked in such a palpable way that I knew like this isn't just my childhood imagination, like there's something to this. So I've always been on sort of a lifelong quest of like learning and like dabbling and looking into certain things, and then eventually like getting more committed and entering like formal training and traditions and things of that nature. And I know you asked for the cliff notes, but that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
So we go from California with you in your formative years,
Mm.
and you eventually end up in the witch capital of the United States, Salem, Massachusetts, and you're reading tarot, if I'm understanding correctly. You're doing work as a psychic reader. You're interacting with people from one end of the socioeconomic spectrum to the other. What
Mhm.
was it that uh, that led to this? Was there some sort of catalyzing moment, or is this something that you just eventually got into during your spiritual evolution, if you will?
Yeah, so my life has been like a really weird series of synchronicities and things just kind of falling into place for me. And I do definitely think that there's something going on behind the scenes, like spirit led. But I moved to the East Coast for a relationship. Um, I was dating this guy, met him a few times, and then, being like a 20-year-old, I was like, I'm gonna move into the country,
Something that all 20-year-olds do at some point or several points. I
Yeah.
can relate.
So I moved there, and I had already, like, before that, for a couple years, I had been having out of body experiences and astral projection, which related, but I still view them as separate things. And I was having these experiences, and of course, I still had my interest in all my like witchcraft things. I was also very interested in shamanism at the time, which was a big thing at the time.
Hmm.
And I was reading The Shamanic Temple of Witchcraft by Christopher Penczak, and my boyfriend was like, "Oh, he lives like right around here." I was like, "What?" So we looked it up. We saw that the Temple of Witchcraft was having an open house. We went, we fell in love with them and the community. And then I got in a weird situation where I was about to lose my job. Like we were laid off temporarily while they were like doing construction. And I got this opportunity to read tarot at Enchanted, which is Laurie Cabot's sort of main base.
Hmm.
And I took it, and then I literally got an email right after I accepted, being like, "Oh, Matt, you can come back to work on Monday." And I'm like, "Oh, I start, reading at this shop on Monday." So I had to make a decision, and I ended up making the decision of going with the shop after consulting my cards and my spirits and having dreams and just being like, "Okay, this doesn't make sense, but I'm going to reject this job for this other one that's like not steady and secure." And it ended up working out because I messaged a coworker from that previous job, like a month into reading in Salem, and asked how the job was going. And she's like, "Oh, actually, like he pulled completely out. Like there is no business anymore." So like it was one of those weird. And if I had turned down the tarot gig, like those spots in Salem, especially the specific
Hmm.
stores, are like heavily coveted, heavily
Yes.
applied. So there's a good chance I wouldn't have gotten that either.
And of course, a good chance that you would be on unemployment and scrambling to find a job. Yeah, I have been there, and I totally understand. You've got to take that leap of faith and walk off the cliff like the fool.
Exactly. And like none of it made sense. Like my boyfriend was even kind of angry at me for choosing the less stable kind of woo job that I was like passionate about. I was super excited about as opposed to the steady job that like sucked. Um, but it all worked out. And it's one of those moments in my life where I have these certain moments where I feel like I'm tested. I don't know if you want to say by the universe or the spirits or like my higher self or whatever, but that felt like one of them. Um, so I was listening, I took the leap of faith, and that initially started a whole like chain of dominoes falling into place to
And here you are, a
where I
prolific
am. Yeah.
author and guest speaker and lecturer. So we've got this interesting origin story, if you will, and your eventual move in your 20s to Salem. Sometime during that period, you have also found yourself following all of these different threads to all of these various spiritual traditions, not as an initiate, but as someone who is interested and is researching and reading extensively. What was the draw for you to these, one could say, disparate practices? You've got the PGM or the Greek magical papyri. You have theosophy, if I'm not mistaken, um, the fairy tradition, shamanic witchcraft or traditional witchcraft. What was the drawing factor for these various traditions as well?
Well, ever since I was a little kid, like scouring the library for like any book on witchcraft, I've just always had this knowledge or this thirst for knowledge of anything esoteric, anything occult. And I am an initiate into certain like certain witchcraft traditions, just not the fairy witchcraft tradition, which is a strong influence.
Mhm.
But it's twofold. Like, so one is like personal gnosis experiences, and then like talking to other like elders, like, do you know what this is? And to be like, oh yeah, this sounds like this thing and this thing. And that sort of like breadcrumbed me into certain areas. But I do see that there is and this is where I get so like I have a very complicated relationship with theosophy, because there are a lot of very problematic and very
Yes.
questionable things in it, you know. But there are certain things that I do think is true, which is that I do believe that there is an underlying current to things.
Mhm.
Not to say that all traditions are the same or religions are the same, but there's a universal current that all these cultures are tapping into. And so like I deeply resonate with that aspect of it. But yeah, like so my experiences with Hecate got me more into like Hecate research, which got me into the PGM, and then my experiences with Magick got me also I have a deep fascination with Carl Jung and his writings. And then you know, I was super drawn to Aleister Crowley and learning about him. And it's interesting because like for me, I have found that Aleister Crowley and Carl Jung, they're almost like two halves of a whole. Like they
Mhm.
help me understand each other because they were exploring the same things and they were exploring the same texts and influences. And that's what drew me to Neoplatonism.
Mhm.
That's what drew me to alchemy. And so yeah, I mean, I was just kind of always searching, looking, you know, finding things that I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely a thing, and I can see how it influences like what I'm doing today in modern witchcraft, or give me new insights that I feel perhaps have been sort of abandoned from the dialogue in terms of occultism. But I'm an eternal seeker before author, before teacher, lecturer, anything like that. Like I am always seeking to learn.
So, at one point, you were writing for Patheos Pagan
Mhm.
and creating content there. What was it that brought you into the literary world as a writer for the metaphysical neo-pagan or cult community?
Yeah, so originally I just had my own blog on my website, and I think I had like a Tumblr where I promoted it because back then Tumblr was the thing. And Jason Mankey saw it and he really liked it. And he was the manager at Patheos Pagan at the time. And he asked me if I would like to write for it. And I was like, absolutely. Like I would love to have a blog. And I'm not going to name names, but there was a big blogger at the time. They're kind of nowhere anymore, but they made these really crappy remarks of like, who cares what Matt Oren has to say about like paganism or witchcraft? No one's going to listen to him. Like Jason Mankey must be desperate to bring him on. Um, which is funny because my blog then went to like break records for Patheos Pagan,
Mhm.
in terms of views and like engagement.
Well, you were
And
drawing in I think at the time when I was reading it, you were drawing in a younger demographic to their site and to their Facebook page.
and a little bit of a witchier one.
Mhm.
'Cause, you know, most of the witchcraft blogs on there tended to be more Gardenerian focused,
Right.
you know, and I was very interested at that time. I was going through my tradcraft phase, which I think every witch goes through that phase, whether they stay with it or not. But that deep dive of
Right.
like Nigel Jackson and, you know,
Good old Nigel.
Harry and all of that. Yeah. Daniel Schulke. So, yeah, I think it brought in people that may not have read Patheos otherwise. I mean, that's my biggest guess. But I also was very involved with the occult communities,
Mhm.
like on the ground. So I had different traditions that I was interacting with and in, as well as sort of having this network reach of being a reader in Salem. And, you know, witches come to Salem, and usually they want to go to Laurie Cabot's shop to get
Right.
psychic readings and advice. So I ended up networking that way and then going to conventions and things of that nature. And then around the same time, both Llewellyn and Weiser approached me and were like, "Hey, would you like to write a book for us?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about that, but like, sure, like I'll give it a shot." And they turned down my first book proposal with Llewellyn. They didn't like the idea. They didn't think it would be have that big of a reach. It was a tarot oriented book. So they're like, come up with something else, give us another proposal. And I ended up proposing Psychic Witch, which ended up being like, thank God that they like denied the first tarot proposal, because Psychic Witch has been like so strong in reaching people and helping people that are new to the craft, or even people who aren't new to the craft, sort of re-dive into things or look at things from a different perspective. One of the really interesting things to me as an author, like because I do look at reviews and I do look at like what people are posting,
Mhm.
is I've recently been seeing videos and posts by people being like, "Oh yeah, when I first read it, like I dismissed it because I'm like, oh, I know all this basic 101 stuff, but like I decided to actually like read it again." And they're like, I got like a whole bunch out of it that I didn't expect. And I think that's part of the magic of Psychic Witch, is that I did sprinkle very like advanced adept stuff into the basics. And like it can be easy to overlook if you're just kind of glossing through it or flipping
Right.
around. But there is depth to that book. But my main intention was to reach people that were interested in these things but didn't know where to begin, and also to bring an emphasis back to the psychic aspect of witchcraft. Because at that time, and I think things are starting to shift a little bit now. It wasn't very energy focused. It started getting more material focused, where
Yes.
it was very like practical magic of like almost like a recipe book. Like you do these things and then it'll work, which if you do those things, it can work. There's a strong chance, but it's not as guaranteed as when you're actually working the energy into the spell.
Right.
Which is weird because that used to be such a strong emphasis early on in like earlier like modern witchcraft, as well as like the occultism of like the Victorians and
Right.
Edwardians, which we draw on strongly in all our not all our, but like most of our Western traditions of magic.
And of course, your title now has been translated into what, 13, 14
Um,
languages?
Something like that. Yeah, both of my books have been translated a lot. Psychic Witch more than Mastering Magic. But yeah, it's like I could not predict like how the book would be so well received. I just recently signed a contract with Llewellyn to do a deluxe edition hardcover. Uh,
Excellent.
and I add another chapter into it, a bonus chapter, and Ivo Dominguez Jr. graced me with a new foreword, which is awesome for this edition. Like the old foreword's still in it, but I also wrote a new introduction, and in that introduction, I also talk about like what led up to Psychic Witch's creation, but also how I had no idea, like I was not psychic enough to predict, like how big this book would be. Because honestly, I just hope that some people would read it, that the overall community wouldn't hate it to death, and that it would help people. So I've been very, very blessed. It came out at just the right time, and it's like magic. It's one of those things where, again, I feel like I've had a lot of really interesting synchronicities where things just sort of worked out in a way that um it feels very spirit led, and not to like discredit like the hard work I've put into it and promoting it and stuff of that nature, but um yeah, I've been very blessed with it, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's reaching people like around the world. The first translated version of the book was in Russian, which surprised me. That was before the whole Ukrainian crisis. And then right after that, it was the Chinese. I got a Chinese translation of it. But I was just like, oh my God, what's next? Like North Korea? Because it you know, and it confused me because I'm like, I'm in California,
Yeah.
and there's not a Spanish edition, you know, like there's not a Spanish translation, but that did eventually come. But yeah, it's blown my mind how much it's been translated and disseminated across the world. And the new book already has a couple of translation purchases already.
I I get the impression just on seeing the promotion for the book and the most unlikely places that it's in, that it's broken out of the category that most Llewellyn books get placed into, and now you're finding it, shoulder to shoulder with a lot of major occult titles instead of the witch oriented titles. So
Yeah,
definitely a testament to that.
yeah, the recently a couple months ago it broke 200,000 sold copies for the English print version, which put it in Llewellyn's ultimate bestseller list, up with like, the Titans, like the people I grew up with, like Silver Ravenwolf and Scott
Mhm.
Cunningham. But it was the first book in like 24 years or something to ever hit that chart. So it's like I feel like that's a very strong testament to the book, to just that any occult book is being this widely received.
Mhm.
Um,
So, in addition to Psychic Witch, you also have a book, Mastering Magic, a course in spellcasting for the Psychic Witch, which, judging by the title, seems to be a compendium or a companion, if you will, of the first. Was this a natural evolution from one title to the next, or was it an assignment from Llewellyn?
no, no, I don't. The only assignments I get from Llewellyn is their periodicals, like their spell a days or like write for our calendar or whatever.
Right.
So Mastering Magic is a lot of the stuff that I wanted in the initial version of Psychic Witch, but you only get so much word count,
Yeah.
right? So I decided to focus on Psychic Witch, not needing any materials. It's very like open hand magic, right? Like no items needed. It's all your mind and your body and your spirit. And so mastering magic is the flip side of that. So like now that you have those things and can do magic without tools or items, like how do you work with the tools and items, and how do you partner with that materia, and how do you like what are the strategies and the approaches to making sure that your magic is successful and does work. And I also wanted to make it sort of a community project. So I
Mhm.
asked different witches that I really respect, or magical practitioners of different types, if they would contribute a spell to the book. So I have that in throughout it. And to kind of keep on theme with the book, like almost all the spells that I provide and other people provide are related to psychic ability, so like awakening psychic ability. But the mechanics of the book still apply to any sort of thing that you're casting for. Because I do see magic and psychic ability as two sides of the same coin, and with Psychic Witch, the premise was that psychic ability can enhance your magic, and you can cast magic just with psychic ability. But I wanted to show the flip side too, that magic can also enhance your psychic ability, and it can kind of create a circuit that goes back and forth, feeding each other.
So you had mentioned collaborators and other individuals in the community. You've also written Pisces Witch, Swimming Through the Starry Seas. You've co-authored with Ivo Dominguez, and just from the reviews alone for that book, yet another title to your credit and his credit, of course. That's gained momentum.
Yeah, Evo is my witch hero. So there's not many people, and I've met so many witches, including lots of elders of different traditions. There's not many people that I consider like a true adept in magic, and I consider Evo a true adept in magic. And he's someone that I admire deeply. I admire how his brain works. I admire his magical ability and his psychic ability. Like I've been able to see both in action. So when this series was announced, I emailed my editor and I was like, "Hey, like, who are you picking for Pisces Witch?" And they're like, she's like, "Oh, I haven't decided yet." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's interesting because like Pisces is the most like psychic and mystical sign of the zodiac. Like that's its stereotype. And it's like, "Oh, yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, I really want this. I want to write a book with Mika Jr. Like get me on this." And she was reluctant because I was still in the middle of writing The Psychic Art of Tarot.
Mhm.
So she was worried that I wouldn't be able to like get both in on their deadlines because I'm notorious for asking for extensions because writing's not something you can just kind of turn on in
No.
on command. Um, so eventually she reluctantly agreed after talking to Evo, and Evo's like, "Yeah, and that's perfect for it." So I had a lot of fun with it, and it actually like really helped me sort of rediscover my passion for writing because I was feeling a little bit burnt out, not just from writing so much, but from like all the promotion in
Yeah.
person and online that I've done for my books. So it's exactly what I needed, and it helped me reapproach my manuscript for the Psychic Art of Tarot in a completely different way, where I was having fun with it again in the way that I had a lot of fun writing Psychic Witch.
So I want to talk about the Psychic Art of Tarot because it has a beautiful companion deck that goes with it. But before we touch on that topic, um, there is the subject of plagiarism that comes to mind. There's the subject of your identity being essentially stolen by these crazy people on social media. And I always think of situations like that where it's like, clearly you're making an impact and people recognize that. So what's the easiest way to siphon off of that impact than by masquerading as you or pulling your work. And you, of course, we this can of course be something that we cut if you choose to do so. But what has this done to impact your writing, if you will, so much so, or as it pertains to the books that have been plagiarized?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's affected sales or anything like that. It's just more of a shitty thing that happens. So like I think I'm up to four plagiarized books. Like AI has tried to plagiarize Psychic Witch. It's made by one of those, like it's not Marie Silva, but it's one of those, right? Like those bot names.
Someone with
And
a familiar first name and a
yeah,
familiar last name just thrown together.
right.
I'm surprised
Right.
we haven't seen an Alistair Gardner yet.
Oh my Meet Your Psychic, because I was just about to use that as an example. I literally was going to joke about Alistair Gardner. Yeah, yeah. So, I mostly like I approach Llewellyn and I'm like, hey, shut this down. Because they have a legal team and it's a lot easier that way. So they usually don't last long. I do buy a copy of each though, because it's a weird memento to have,
Yeah,
like, this plagiarized book. I'm very hardcore on credit and crediting my sources. Like if you read my book, like I'm all about that, like with footnotes and bibliography, or just even saying, like even at the point of Psychic Witch, like I remember when my early editors was like, it sounds like you're name dropping a lot. And I'm like, no, I'm literally saying I learned this technique from
which is
this.
important to credit these
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah. Like I'm not saying that like I invented this thing. I'm trying to give credit. And so they're like, oh, okay, cool, we'll leave it. But I have seen some books because like as an author, like a magical or occult author, the things that are uniquely yours,
Yes.
either perspectives or certain practices. And I have seen those in other books written by people, and I never mention it. And I've even endorsed some of them because in the end, I'm like, while it sucks, while it would have been like cool if you at least threw the book in the bibliography, like at least, um, you know, the book's still good and it's still, for me, it's about the message getting out there and the practices getting out there. So while it's shitty, I still support that work going out into the world, and I much rather have someone ripping me off than a computer,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and then with the Instagram thing, it's mostly Instagram, but also TikTok, where, like they'll clone my profile and then
Yeah.
message people with like Grand Rising, the ancestors told me
That's the typical one.
yeah, to give you a reading or whatever. And it's frustrating. It's very whack-a-mole. But the thing that's really upsetting is sometimes people really think it is me that's going out and scamming them, and then like, like people who were reading my books are then turned off. And I've even gotten
Yeah.
angry messages being like, yo, that was not me. Like, look at the pinned post in my profile, like warning people about it. Like, I'm too busy to be trying to inbox people for,
And you're also pretty diligent about, sharing. These are the latest offenders, and it's like
right,
Matt Auryn underscore 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 star. So yeah,
right.
it's wild.
It's yeah. And a lot of times, like, I'll get people be like, is this you? Because they don't know if maybe I made a private account like they're claiming. And I'm like, no, I know how to spell my name. Like, because a lot of times it's like variations on the spelling,
Yeah.
like an extra letter or something of that nature. But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the like AI plagiarism or anything like that like really hurt me as an author, but I also know that like I am in more of a privileged place as an author than a lot of my peers, because occult books don't sell like other genres of books. And so like, it really hurts, like if I wasn't in my position that I am in my book sales, like I can see how it would really hurt someone's
Yeah.
book sales,
If
but
you weren't writing occult books or anything of the esoteric nature, what would your writing consist of? Is that something else that you've explored, whether
you
it's
know, it
fiction
would
or
it would just be that, because writing came out of my passion for spirituality and metaphysics and the occult, not so much the other way around. I never thought I would be writing at all, and I never even thought like anyone would even like my blogs when I wrote them, because I'm not educated in the traditional sense. Like I have a high school diploma. Like I was even held back a year, which is like a whole long story dealing with satanic panic and Columbine. Um, but like so I don't like I'm not I never had the passion or the thought of like I want to be a writer or an author. It's just sort of something that came as a byproduct out of like the occult work that I was doing.
so getting back on track here, since I insisted on taking this detour, the Psychic Art of Tarot, opening your inner eye for more insightful readings.
Yeah.
You've got a forward in there with your partner in crime, your new
Yeah.
partner in crime, Rachel True, and of course there's the accompanying deck that's published by Black Tarot, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so art the deck came first. So
Hmm.
True Black Tarot is by Arthur Wang. And then originally I was gonna write the guidebook for it, but then like something didn't work out, so he wasn't able to. But then he came out with his second deck, which is like all white, and it's called the
Yes.
Ephemera Tarot. And so like I co-wrote that book lit with him. And I did that for free. The exchange was like, hey, will you do the cover art for my next book? Because he doesn't do commissions. He doesn't do projects with other people because he's very much an artist.
Yeah.
He's very much about like he makes what he wants to make. But he agreed and I was thrilled. And so I got the beautiful cover that I did.
How was the development process for that book? Was it something that required a great deal of research, or was this something that you drew on from your pre-existing knowledge as a reader and as a practitioner?
Yeah, so there's very little that was actually researched. The thing that I researched the most was Haru in the end. At the end of the book, I kind of end with Haru, since that's a little bit more of an advanced topic. But I wrote two versions of this book. I wrote the first version and I gave it to my editor, and she's like, Matt, like, we're gonna assume everyone buying your book knows how to read tarot. So you don't need to go over the 101 stuff of like what each card means and the history of tarot and all of that. Like, there's plenty of books like that. So I just thought, like, Llewellyn and Weiser, they always want things to be sort of either beginner level or like start beginner and then move into your topic.
Hmm.
But while it was frustrating on one level, and I could see a lot of people being very frustrated, like, I wrote this book, now I have to rewrite it. I was like, fuck yeah, let's do this. I am going to go full psychic on this book, which is what I wanted, because now I have all this word count that is essentially opened up.
Hmm.
So what the book is essentially the books that I wanted when I was a kid, just like Psychic Witch, which is why I'm so excited about this. Because there's so much on tarot. Either so if you go pre-Mary Greer,
Hmm.
right? All the text on tarot tends to be very fortune telly. It
Yes.
tends to be more cartomancy, like so it's still very like this card means this, but it's more like predictive in nature, right? And then after Mary Greer and then Rachel Pollack, we
Hmm.
have the strong wave of it being completely different, where it's more of like looking at the historic, like keywords and meanings of the weight deck, but then kind of psychological and also sort of getting a little more intuitive with like how it applies and stuff.
Hmm.
But there were no books that discussed like the psychic aspect of tarot, because there's so much that can be done with tarot in terms of energy work and psychic ability,
Hmm.
that I picked up so many tips and tricks working in Salem, and I developed so many of my own. And that's what really elevated me as a tarot reader and made my career as a tarot reader so popular. I was in really high demand because of like the way that I connected with the cards and the information that I could pull through. So I stopped reading tarot when Psychic Witch came out because I needed time more than anything. I needed it more than money, because tarot readings take time and when you're like completely booked. So I kept hiking my rates up higher and higher to things that I was like, no one will ever pay this. But then people kept paying it. So eventually I had to be like, nope, nope, we're done doing tarot. I need time to write books. That's what I want to do. I want to teach a person how to fish for themselves.
Mm.
So since I'm not a professional reader and I don't need to safeguard these sort of trade secrets that I
Right.
had in terms of psychic ability and energy, I was like, I want to give it to the world. So that's what I did.
And it's wild that you've come full circle with that when a tarot title was something that Llewellyn passed on first before moving on to Psychic Witch. So good on you for that, for
Yeah.
sticking through with it. Um, One thing that I, of course, always love talking about with guests, in addition to the origin story, if you are willing to indulge me, tell me a little bit about your practice. I know a lot of viewers and listeners who are familiar with your work on a surface level or have picked up your book that may not be familiar with your work. Give us a little insight, if you will.
So it depends. It depends on what I'm going through in my own life in terms of training. So, if I'm training with a certain tradition, my practice is going to look a little bit different during that training period. But it's pretty much everything that's in my first two books. You know, I I do daily offerings and devotionals. I do kala, which comes from the fairy tradition, which is the
Hmm.
water rite, as a daily purification process. Everything that's in my books, I pretty much do, and that's the public access insight into what I do magically. There are things that are never going to be in the books because they're just for me. And it's not even so much about like gatekeeping it or like trade secrets, like I was saying, but like there's certain things in a magical practice as you do your magical practice that are fantastic and revelatory, but it's still a personal gnosis thing.
Hmm.
It may not be for everyone and it may not work for everyone.
Right.
Um, But yeah, a lot of my magic is very basic if you were to look at it. A lot of my spells aren't very complex or grand. It's very much candle magic and energy work. I do a lot of magic in my inner temple, which I discuss in my books, um, and like on the inner planes.
Hmm.
My, so like it's different. Like if I'm doing like AA training, I'm doing the AA training as my daily practice. If I'm doing like Temple of Witchcraft, I'm doing whatever level that is. It differs a little bit depending
Hmm.
on where I am in my life in terms of like magical training. Like when I was doing Jack Grell's PGM course, which his courses are amazing. Jack is brilliant. I love him. If you're interested in the PGM, definitely check out Jack's work, including the Hecateon. It's a fantastic book. But like for example, like then my practice will be incorporating those things and working them. When I'm studying with a tradition, I try not to bring any of my own practices or insights or ideas
Hmm.
into the training. I try to do the training from a clear slate, beginner's mind, just exactly as they do it. And then I'm always the type of person that I'm always trying to look at, like, well, what is the tech of this? Like, why is it,
Yes.
like how, like, what is the mechanics of that? How can I simplify it? So it's almost like what a lot of the chaos magicians were doing in like the 80s, right?
Hmm.
Like they're like looking at like, well, how can I strip this down? The thing with chaos magic, though, is I think they stripped it down too much and they kind of disregarded a lot of the
Yeah,
spirit aspect of
absolutely.
working with it. Um, so I'm very much that type of person, and that's a lot of where my innovation comes from too, is like breaking things down, as well as looking at like nature or science and looking at like what are these principles going on in the universe of how things occur. Because I honestly believe that's a big part of how we got magic. Aside from like, the gnosis of like spirit interaction, but I think a lot of it is just observation. I think the Emerald Tablet, for example, and like a big part of alchemy had to deal with just looking at natural processes of like the heavens and the earth and seeing
Right.
how things like transmute and cycle and things of that nature.
So you've got a new project that you have launched with the incredibly talented Rachel True.
That's why I kind of jumped at the chance when we were talking about like, hey, let's do a podcast because I feel so comfortable with you, and I'll actually talk on the phone with you, which is like,
because you know what I think is like what the world needs is another podcast. No, but I do think based on our Instagram live, the world needs a little more you and me.
and I have fun anytime I talk to you, so I'm hoping we have a lot of fun here. This is the Circle Is podcast.
Is it the Circle Is podcast?
Yeah,
Wait,
because it's a pun. It's
okay, sorry,
podcast.
do it again.
The
Do it
Circle
again.
Is Good.
I was wondering what was the impetus behind that. Was that something that you just happened to wake up to one day with an email from her, or because I know that you have interacted with her. Of course, she's written the foreword to your book. Was this something that happened organically, or how did this come about?
Sort of. So I've tried to do podcasts with other people and they've failed. Like I've even tried to do one with my husband, Devin. Uh,
Your husband, Coven.
and it's just like, yeah, you have different types of chemistry with different people. And
Mhm.
like Rachel brings out a side of me that is like just really fun. And I am a millennial, so I hate talking on the phone, but she's one of those people that like when I would have phone conversations, it'd be like 3 hours pass and I didn't even realize it because I'm enjoying it. But it's interesting because, me and Rachel are different in so many terms, right? So like we're different in generations, of genders, of race, of like spiritual background, but we have so much in common as well. And we just like our friendship like shouldn't make sense on the surface, but it does, because she doesn't call herself a witch. She's very much like in the camp of like Stevie Nicks
Mhm.
or like Florence Welch, where you're like, Which one of those,
There's
by the way?
something witchy going on here, but I can't put my
Right.
finger on it.
Well, and I think a big part of it is also like public perception, and
Yes.
she's not part of a formal tradition, which one of those names I gave an example for, I know is in a formal tradition, and I won't say, but because I'm in that tradition, I know that they're, yeah. Um, but so like, and Rachel's very psychic, though she doesn't use that word, she uses intuitive, which I define differently from psychic, but I think she's psychic. And we did a couple of reels promoting different things. So I did one with her early on promoting her tarot deck and companion book. And then she did one helping me promote Mastering Magic. And so like every time we did a reel together, like people really loved it. They loved our chemistry.
Yeah.
They loved us just talking because it's very much a conversation of just like
Very much so, yes.
yeah, so Rachel like mentioned how she wanted to do a podcast. She's been wanting to do a podcast with Feruza, but Feruza's so busy, it's hard to nail her down. And I was like, hey, well, if you ever want to do a podcast together, like I co-own a podcast network with Devin. He owns the Modern Witch Podcast
Mhm.
Network. And like we can host it, we can have him do all the editing and all the back end stuff so we don't have to worry about it. So she's like, hell yeah, I'm game. So our podcast isn't strictly, even though so far the episodes that are out are kind of spiritual and tarot related, and we do have a lot of that. But our podcast isn't just metaphysical. Like we categorized it in the society and culture category for podcasts because we just want to talk to different people
Yeah.
that interest us. So we have a lot of actors and musicians and things of that nature that are on our guest list coming up, as well as, metaphysical teachers and authors. And we have an episode with Mary Kay Greer up because I know a lot of people in the occult world that she doesn't, and every time we talk tarot, whether it's in person or publicly, she always talks about how like Mary Greer is her fairy tarot mother. So I was like, well, I want to make this to where you guys can like virtually meet at least and talk. So that was really cool to facilitate.
So, what is the long-term vision for Matt Auryn as psychic, tarot reader, and podcast host, and author, and lecturer? What do you see yourself doing in 10 years?
Yeah, I don't know. And that sounds really funny as someone that's very focused on like psychic ability and like someone that's very career driven in
Mhm.
this field. But a lot of it is, it sounds very woo, but a lot of the work that right,
It comes with the territory.
right. But a lot of the work that I do feel is in alignment with my true will. And I'm not saying that it is my true will, but it's definitely in alignment because I don't think that true will is like a destination or something
Right.
you fully figure out. Like I feel like it's more of a journey you're kind of led down, of discovering true will. And perhaps that changes in life too, and I'll see. My main mission at the moment as an occult teacher is I'm trying to re-enchant the world. And what I mean by that is, that's why I have such an emphasis on energy work as well as the power of imagination, which has been severely dismissed in occultism up until Matt Auryn comes back, right? Because I believe that we are co-creators, right? Like that is part of why I believe in magic. And I believe that people need to take the steering wheel back in terms of the world. So even things that are like so culturally ingrained that we don't even realize, I feel are feeding the path that we're moving for, like
Yes.
we're heading down. So like, for example, as people in the United States and a lot of countries that are similarly westernized, we have a strong Christian background and influence. And a big part of that is this idea of revelations and apocalypse and the world ending and Armageddon. And, for me, I feel like we feed into that myth of the world ending, and that's ushering all these horrible things happening, as well as apathy for what's happening. and things of that nature. And so my main goal at the moment, which I haven't fully reached yet, is I'm trying to get people to recognize that they can dream their own myths of where the future is headed and stop feeding this idea that the world is ending. Because even during the pandemic, like a lot of us have been joking and still joking about how like we're at the end times, like it, because it felt very much like that during the
Yes.
pandemic, and then like the rise of Trump, and like just like a lot that seemed like what is going on. Um, so yeah, I want people to realize that like we aren't bystanders and we aren't hopeless, and that's not, action is very, very important. But just as important as action is the power of our minds and our magic. So
Right.
that's what I mean by re-enchanting the world. I don't mean, some people have used it in a way that's almost sort of like deluding themselves to reality, and that's definitely not my goal at all. Like, we're physical for a reason. Our work is in the physical.
I know that you're a staple of the conference in Maryland, Sacred Space, but you also have another event, if you will, and that would be the Omega Retreat. I was wondering if perhaps you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'm super excited about the Omega retreat. It's a psychic witch retreat. So it's a week-long retreat where I will be teaching people the main things, the main practices and ideas of psychic witch and mastering magic in a week-long retreat, as well as some stuff that's not in the books that is complementary and helpful. And I'm super excited and I'm super, super nervous because it's like Omega is like the world's like biggest spiritual retreat. Like it's had huge names, like it's had the Dalai Lama, it's had Eckhart Tolle, it's like big names. And I'm like, I'm just fucking Matt Warren over here. Like. But it is cool because like I'm one of the first witches that they've ever asked to like have a retreat there. So like that's a huge shift also in paradigm that they would be allowing it. Similarly as like when we saw Hay House, start publishing witchcraft books because Louise Hay was so against witchcraft and was
Yeah.
like, we'll never publish a witchcraft book. And then she died and
Plot twist.
witchcraft became popular, and they're like, oh, let's get that. But yeah, I'm super, super excited for it because I haven't done a lot of intensive work with people on this material in person, because when this book was released, when my author career started, the pandemic just started, so there was a lot of isolation. I moved across the country back to California. So like I lost a lot of my in-person community. So I'm really excited because usually when I teach this material to initiates or potential initiates for traditions, it's been online. It's been very Zoom-y, So it's going to be nice to be like, have you seen the show on? It's either on HBO or Netflix with Nicole Kidman, and what is it called? Nine Perfect Strangers.
Oh my God, I love that show. It's on
Yes.
Hulu.
Yes. Okay. Hulu. So the Omega Retreat, the Omega Center of Holistic Studies looks just like that. So like I keep joking
Minus the
about,
psychedelic drugs.
yeah. So I keep joking about like how I'm going to like come in just like her, and I'm gonna start everyone off with smoothies, because
Make sure you get a lace front instead of a hard front wig if you're coming in dressed like her.
right. Fantastic show, but like what I mean by that is not the cult part, but like how beautiful the center is. It's very much like that. So I'm really excited and really honored to do that. And then earlier in that month, I will be doing Temple Fest at the Temple of Witchcraft. I'll be one of the presenters there. So I think that's pretty much this year. This year's not as booked. Next year is crazy, and I haven't even started announcing it, but I literally have a keynote or a retreat every month somewhere in the United
Wow.
States. Like I think it stops in November. I have November, December off. So I'm definitely in this weird stage of like the work that I'm doing where it's like I have to, like I feel busy this year, but it's like I have to like get the pace. I have to get the rhythm because it's only going to get busier and hopefully still busier, because I am in that time of the life where I'm supposed to work the hardest, so hopefully I can retire someday and be a hermit in the woods and not ever have to open whatever the equivalent of TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever that is.
What words of wisdom would you like to impart to viewers and listeners?
Oh my God, words of wisdom. I don't even
And
consider
480 words or less.
I think I get a lot of questions from beginners, but this is also something that I think is helpful for anyone of any level. Is I think authenticity is very, very important and something that people should be revisiting and questioning and checking with themselves. And I mean that just in terms of like the integrity of your relationship with your own practice, but also how you're speaking about your magical practice and magic, and as well as your expertise. We live in a really weird era right now where a lot of people are getting information from influencers that don't necessarily have either the research, the experience, or the training to be leading people and feeding a lot of BS. Some of them published, some of them not. So I think just like making sure that you have integrity with your own practice, because I do believe that magic and witchcraft like is part of my animism woo. I believe that it is a spirit. And I feel that when you speak illy of it, you disrespect it. And it is not a passive spirit. I also very much believe that like being a dishonest person in general weakens your magic. There's some people that are like the true lie or whatever, but the understanding behind the true lie, which is the idea that like when you cast a spell, you're lying to the universe and making it true. But in my view, if you are being completely dishonest all the time, like why would the spirits in the universe listen to you when you cast your magic, when your words can't be trusted and have no weight to them? So that's my little weird tangential rant on that question. I don't know if I answered it or not, but
I think that will suffice for now. Well, where can people find you online?
yeah, so you can find me at auryn.net, auryn.net. My social media handle everywhere is Matt Auryn, at Matt Auryn, Matt with one T. No misspellings, no numbers, no underscores, no account of mine is going to message you with grand rising. The ancestors have asked me to contact you.
All right. Well, Matt, I want to thank you so much for your time, for joining me today. It has been a pleasure, and I look forward to interacting with you in the future.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
If you're a new viewer and would like to stay up to date with the latest from BiblioSophia, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for our channel.